would have thought that getting my recreational pilot license could be so much fun? My flight instructor will be so proud of me.
Hey, student pilot, what are you doing?
Oh, hi, Mr. Flight Instructor, sir. I was just engaging in recreation in preparation for my recreational pilot license like you asked me to.
You're playing ping pong when you should be practicing your flying?
But ping pong is a form of recreation, isn't it?
Student pilot, newsflash, ping pong has nothing to do with flying. Yes, it does. Watch me send this ping pong ball flying.
Am I concerned? Yeah, just a little bit. The recreational pilot license has nothing to do with recreational sports. I don't know how he confused the two.
The recreational pilot license was originally created as a simplified path to becoming a pilot. But today, very few student pilots pursue it, and most choose either the sport pilot license or the private pilot license instead.
In this day and age, the recreational pilot license is one of the least common pilot certificates that most beginner pilots will pursue. Most pilots will pursue the sport pilot license or the private pilot license instead. Check out this video where we had gone over the different types of entry-level pilot licenses that are available to aspiring pilots. So the question is, if the recreational pilot license is available as an option, why is it that so few aspiring pilots actually choose this option? And more importantly, should you pursue the recreational pilot license?
The recreational pilot certificate was created by the FAA in 1989 as a simpler alternative to the private pilot certificate. The idea behind this was meant to be fairly straightforward. Give people a way to enjoy local recreational flying without requiring all of the training and privileges associated with a private pilot certificate. It was designed to be more capable than a sport pilot certificate while requiring less training than a private pilot certificate. At least, that was the theory.
So let's take a look and see what exactly are the requirements in order to get your recreational pilot license.
To obtain a recreational pilot license, you must be at least 17 years old, read, speak, write, and understand English, pass the FAA knowledge test, pass the practical test, also known as the check ride, complete a minimum of 30 flight hours.
For comparison, sport pilot, 20 hours minimum. Recreational pilot, 30 hours minimum. Private pilot, 40 hours minimum. Keep in mind that these are just the minimum legal requirements. As with any pilot certificate, most student pilots typically require more than the FAA minimums before they are truly ready for the check ride.
So what about the medical requirements in order to get a recreational pilot license?
Unlike with the sport pilot license, the recreational pilot license requires you to obtain either the FAA medical certificate or basic med as a prerequisite. This is an important distinction between the sport versus the recreational pilot license.
One of the biggest advantages of the sport pilot certificate is that many pilots can fly using only a valid driver's license and are exempt from obtaining an FAA medical certificate. Because recreational pilots typically still need a medical certificate, this removes one of the major incentives that attracts people to the sport pilot pathway.
So why did the FAA create an entirely new recreational pilot license when there's already a private pilot license available for aspiring pilots?
The Federal Aviation Administration recognized that many people simply wanted to fly for fun. Not everyone wanted to travel long distances, fly at night, pursue instrument ratings, or eventually become professional pilots. The recreational pilot certificate was intended to lower the barriers to entry by reducing training requirements, while still allowing pilots to carry a passenger and fly a broader range of aircraft than sport pilots. The goal was to make aviation more affordable and accessible.
All right, we're part of the way through the list. I just wanted to take a brief moment to invite you to hit the like button if you're finding the content of this video to be helpful. And be sure to hit the subscribe button as we will be producing more content for aspiring aviation enthusiasts like you.
So what can you actually do with a recreational pilot license?
With a recreational pilot license, you can fly eligible single-engine aircraft, you can carry one passenger, you can fly during daylight hours, and operate for personal and recreational purposes. You can build flight experience, and continue accumulating hours toward future certificates and ratings. And that last one's an important point. The flight time you log as a recreational pilot does not necessarily disappear, per se, if you later decide to pursue more advanced certificates.
So now let's talk about what are the restrictions of the recreational pilot license.
Recreational pilots cannot fly for compensation or hire, fly at night, fly under instrument flight conditions, fly higher than 18,000 feet MSL, or carry more than one passenger. In addition, recreational pilots are generally limited to operating within 50 nautical miles of their departure airport unless they receive additional training and endorsements. Certain airspace operations may also require additional endorsements. These limitations are one of the biggest reasons the certificate never became widely adopted.
Now at this point, there are some common questions that many aspiring pilots may be asking about the recreational pilot license.
Can recreational pilots fly across state borders within the U.S.?
The answer is yes. This is actually a common misconception. There is, in fact, no FAA rule that prohibits crossing a state border. The actual limitation involves distance, not state lines. If a neighboring state is within your permitted operating area, crossing into that state is perfectly legal. With additional endorsements, longer cross-country flights become possible.
Can a recreational pilot fly into Class Bravo airspace?
Yes, but additional training and endorsements are required. The same concept applies to certain Class Charlie and Class Delta airports as well.
Can a recreational pilot fly under instrument flight rules?
No. Recreational pilots are limited to operating under visual flight rules only. Instrument flying requires a private pilot certificate and an instrument rating.
Can recreational pilots fly at night?
No. Night operations are prohibited.
Can a recreational pilot carry passengers?
Yes, but only one passenger may be carried at a time.
Now, when getting started with aviation, there are three common entry-level pathways: the recreational pilot license, the sport pilot license, and the private pilot license. Let's compare each of these side by side to find out which one is the right one for you. And be sure to check out this video where we do a deeper analysis comparing each of these three.
Let's start with the training requirements. A sport pilot certificate requires a minimum of 20 flight hours and can be earned using just a valid driver's license instead of an FAA medical.
The recreational pilot certificate increases that requirement to 30 flight hours and does require an FAA medical certificate.
And the private pilot certificate, on the other hand, requires at least 40 flight hours, along with an FAA medical, making it the most comprehensive of the three.
Now let's compare what you can actually do with each certificate.
A sport pilot can carry one passenger, but is limited to flying light sport aircraft, as defined by the new Mosaic rules, and generally cannot fly at night.
A recreational pilot can also carry one passenger and fly larger aircraft, but is generally restricted to flying within 50 nautical miles of their home airport unless additional endorsements are obtained.
A private pilot license has far fewer restrictions. It allows you to carry multiple passengers on board with you. It allows you to fly cross-country throughout the United States. It allows you to operate at night. And this license serves as the foundation for advanced certificates, such as the instrument rating and commercial pilot license.
And that's where the recreational pilot license runs into trouble. It requires significantly more training than the sport pilot license, but provides far fewer privileges than the private pilot license.
All right, you've made it this far into the video. As a token of appreciation, I invite you to click on the link in the description below this video where you can get a free download of the Private Pilot Checklist Toolkit.
So, if the recreational pilot license still exists, why don't flight schools talk about it very often?
The answer comes down to economics and practicality. Imagine two students walk into a flight school. The first wants the simplest and least expensive route into aviation. The instructor will often recommend the sport pilot certificate. The second wants maximum flexibility and eventually hopes to travel farther, fly at night, earn additional ratings, or pursue aviation professionally. The instructor will usually recommend the private pilot certificate. The recreational pilot certificate ends up squeezed between those two options. It still requires a medical certificate. It still requires substantial flight training. Yet many of the limitations remain. As a result, most instructors find that their students are better served by either the sport pilot pathway or the private pilot pathway. This doesn't mean the recreational pilot certificate is bad. It simply means that for most students, there is usually a better fit.
So, just how many aspiring pilots actually choose the recreational pilot license option? The numbers tell an interesting story, and they may explain why you've met plenty of private pilots and sport pilots, but you've probably never met a recreational pilot.
Let's look at the FAA pilot population data. According to the U.S. Civil Airman Statistics Report, in 2025, there were a grand total of 174,155 registered private pilots, 7,450 registered sport pilots, and an astonishingly lonely figure of a mere 54 registered recreational pilots. And this number has steadily been decreasing over the past 10 years. There were 175 registered recreational pilots back in 2016.
Keep in mind that the recreational pilot certificate isn't necessarily a bad certificate. It simply occupies a very narrow niche that most aspiring pilots bypass in favor of either the sport pilot certificate or the private pilot certificate. The return on investment in terms of time and training costs for a recreational pilot is just not as advantageous as compared to these other licenses.
So, with so few people pursuing the recreational pilot license, is the FAA ever going to get rid of it?
No. The recreational pilot certificate still exists and continues to be issued by the FAA. There has been no announcement that it is being discontinued as of the recording of this video. However, it has largely been overshadowed by the sport pilot and private pilot pathways. So while it is still available, it has become one of the least common pilot certificates in modern aviation.
Now, you may be wondering, if you do decide to pursue the recreational pilot license, are you essentially stuck there? Are there still opportunities for advancement in aviation?
You are absolutely not stuck. And yes, there absolutely are opportunities for advancement in aviation if you go down this route. One of the biggest misconceptions concerning the recreational pilot certificate is that it creates a dead end. It doesn't. All of the flight time you accumulate as a recreational pilot can be logged and later applied toward higher certificates. That means the hours you spend training and flying are not wasted.
A recreational pilot can continue training and go on to earn a private pilot certificate. After obtaining a private pilot certificate, the pilot can pursue an instrument rating. From there, they can work toward a commercial pilot certificate, then potentially become a flight instructor, and eventually qualify for an airline transport pilot certificate. So technically, yes, a recreational pilot could eventually become an airline pilot. However, very few professional pilots begin their journey this way. Most future professional pilots start directly with private pilot training because it provides greater flexibility and aligns more closely with advanced training requirements.
In this video, we had recently covered the new Mosaic rules that greatly expand the privileges of the sport pilot license. So maybe you're wondering, have there been any recent updates to modernize the recreational pilot license as well?
Not really. Mosaic primarily focused on sport pilot privileges and light sport aircraft regulations. The recreational pilot certificate has not undergone a comparable modernization effort. As a result, the certificate remains largely unchanged, while sport pilot privileges have become increasingly more attractive.
So in light of everything we've covered in this video, is the recreational pilot license still worth pursuing in this day and age?
For a small group of pilots, the answer may be yes. If your goal is simply local daytime flying, carrying one passenger, and enjoying aviation as a hobby, the recreational pilot certificate can still accomplish that mission, and it can do so on a budget. However, for most aspiring pilots, the answer is probably no. If you want the simplest route into aviation, the sport pilot certificate often makes more sense. If you want long-term flexibility, the private pilot certificate usually provides far more value for a relatively modest increase in training. That leaves the recreational pilot certificate stuck in the middle.
So, The bottom line is that the recreational pilot license isn't a useless certificate by any means. In fact, it accomplishes exactly what it was intended for. It's a lower cost, less intense pilot license with a lower barrier of entry for those aspiring aviation enthusiasts who just want to be able to fly recreationally for fun and are willing to accept the limitations that are imposed by it.
The question isn't whether the recreational pilot certificate works. The real question is whether it solves a problem that isn't already solved better by either the sport pilot certificate or the private pilot certificate. Pilots who want simplicity often choose sport pilot. Pilots who want freedom often choose private pilot. And because the recreational pilot certificate sits directly between those two options, it has become one of the rarest pilot certificates issued by the FAA today. So if you're considering becoming a pilot in this day and age, ask yourself one simple question. Do you want the easiest path into aviation, or do you want the most flexibility? Because your answer to that question will usually point you toward either the sport pilot certificate or the private pilot certificate, and explain why so few people choose the recreational pilot certificate.
So are you thinking about getting the recreational pilot license? Leave a comment below and let us know.